Hi, and welcome to Coping During the COVID Crisis. I'm Janet Gross. Late summer, early fall, while a lot of the country think of, cooling temperatures and falling leaves, here we think, obviously, of hurricanes and tropical storm prep, especially this summer with a prediction of an unusually active season. And of course, that's on top of this unusual year with the pandemic still raging. Dr. Roy Salgado, professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, joins us to talk and walk through the concerns and stress of that combination. It's stressful enough when you got to decide whether you're going to go or stay.
Like we don't have enough to worry about, right? We already have enough to worry about, but nevertheless, we have to think about this as well. The calendar year and the climate still is what it is, and it doesn't change. And this is peak season here in southern Louisiana. It's peak hurricane season in the weeks that we're currently in, late August, early September. And we do have a lot of projected activity out in the Atlantic and in the Gulf. And so we need to still keep our eye there and be mindful of that, and to not let our guard down, and to continue to have in place the evacuation plans, or the hunker down in place plan in the event of some sort of tropical storm or evacuation plan for a hurricane. And so people are wondering, what do we do? Do we not do? People are asking, does this mean that we can't evacuate because of the stay-at-home orders with the pandemic? So what if it's a Category 3 or a 5? The answer is, if it's big enough, leave. Go. Evacuate. If there is a mandatory evacuation, don't think about it, go. Because when you think about all of this, it's everything that we're doing is to stay alive, right? Mm-hmm. We're maintaining social distance. We are washing our hands. We're wearing a mask that covers our mouth and our nose, and washing all of the surfaces for the purposes of staying healthy, and people with who are perhaps more compromised with their immune system, staying alive. And so it doesn't help to stay in the city of New Orleans or in southeastern Louisiana or in the Gulf Coast region if we are impacted by a Category 3, 4, or 5, and we're not alive. We need to leave. We need to evacuate if that is the case. And I don't think that any municipality would deny anyone the opportunity of leaving, to go up to northern Louisiana or perhaps another region. So let's just keep that in mind. If there are mandatory evacuations, we leave. And if we do leave, then we need to prepare and pack accordingly. We're going to be packing differently than other years. We're going to always pack the way we have, with our hurricane preparedness kit.
Cookies and chips.
Pork rinds. I love pork rinds.
No, you're right. It's going to be a whole different go bag, I guess.
Right, and we're going to add to that our, COVID-19 kit, if you will, with hand sanitizer and toilet paper and soap and disinfectants and disinfectant wipes and masks and all of those things that we need. Extra water. Well, with hurricane evacuations, water is always part of the preparedness kit, but also in this preparation. And just be mindful that we need to keep our eye on two things. We need to keep our eye on the activity in the Gulf and in the Atlantic, as well as activity in terms of peaks and lows in different hotspots in either Louisiana or in other neighboring states that we may choose to evacuate to. You don't want to leave the eye of one storm to go into a hot spot somewhere else necessarily. So there are a couple of things that you need to be mindful of as you plan this year for a potential threat.
And I think a lot of that you're going to have to pay more attention to not only the weather, but the advice that probably, hopefully, state leaders will give us as far as those things. Absolutely. And right now Louisiana is a hot spot, and it can go up and down. But if a neighboring state turns into one, or they don't want us there, or those kinds of things, who knows what's going to happen? Right.
And so these are things for which we might have to be more mindful. What if there is a neighboring state that decides there's too many people out of this region from a hotspot that are now coming in our area, and we're persona non grata? Yeah. So we need to think perhaps about evacuating further north in the state of Louisiana. And so finding areas in northern Louisiana to evacuate to if that's the case. God willing, there are other neighboring states who would allow us to go into their respective communities And if we do, that we be respectful of their guidelines, that we be respectful of their communities. We don't want to take our hotspot infections out into other communities either. We want to protect ourselves and be safe, but we want to protect others as well. We want to protect our fellow residents and citizens in Texas, in Mississippi, in Florida, in Alabama, Georgia, wherever it is that we could potentially go, and be mindful of that and maintaining that distance and following those guidelines and wearing our masks. And it's a new season, a new hurricane season in 2020 in terms of the things that we're faced with, but things that we have to think about ahead of time. We don't want this to come and surprise us the day of or the day before an evacuation.
Right, and I think that's part of it, is to look ahead, because you also don't want to count on everything being wherever you go there.
Right.
And so you don't want to be a burden on that particular community if you don't have, oh, we didn't bring that,
Right.
we didn't bring that. And now you're going to find, uh-oh. Or if you stay home, nothing's going to come in.
Right.
So
right.
there won't be supplies that are going to be refilled if,
Right.
if something bad happens.
Year after year, we hear of people who choose to stay,
Yeah.
and then people having to be rescued. And this year you might find some of that as well. And to be mindful that you may not have the supplies for a determined period of time if you have to be rescued because you've stayed. And if you go, that you be considerate and mindful of what those communities are asking of you as well. We want to all be safe, we want to all be healthy, and we want to make responsible decisions. And so being informed on these two fronts at the same time and making a most informed decision is going to be even more crucial this year than perhaps others.
And if you're kind of thinking about it and you're a little concerned about it and things like that, I do want to mention the special service that the University of Holy Cross does offer in counseling.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
The University of Holy Cross has been offering free counseling services to residents of the state of Louisiana since the pandemic has started. We've always offered services at a nominal fee, but the Maronites of Holy Cross and the board of directors, along with the administration, has decided, let's waive these fees during these difficult times. And so what one can do is call the counseling center, and the administrative assistant would take that call and forward it to the clinical director, Dr. Ryan White, who will then assign it to a counselor in training, and then that counselor will call you back and begin providing services, and including making difficult decisions. Should I stay or should I go? What should I do? How should I prepare? To be able to make responsible choices for yourself and for your loved ones.
Okay, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about that in our next segment. When we come back, we'll talk with one of the counselors at the University of Holy Cross and what they're doing to help people stay on track no matter what way the storms track. Stay with us. Welcome back. In this COVID world where we try to make home our virus-safe place, we all know evacuation plans can mean leaving, hurrying off to somewhere else, somewhere safe from the storm. Joining us to help us try to keep it together as we make those plans is Dr. Ryan White, director of the Thomas E. Chambers Counseling Center at the University of Holy Cross. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Okay, so we were just talking about the counseling service that the University of Holy Cross offers. Would that be available if in the event of a hurricane? How would that work?
Absolutely. We're already operating remotely away from campus, seeing clients, primarily through Zoom. So we would be able to maintain our operations even if both counselors and clients needed to evacuate in the event of a hurricane.
So everybody's on board with wherever they get, they can just power up and, continue to help wherever the other person is if they're evacuating or staying home.
We have policies in place to guide counselors through being able to set up environments wherever they may end up that are conducive to being able to provide services for our clients.
Are there special considerations for that? I mean, I guess, besides having an internet connection, I'm sure that
Oh, that's one of the main ones.
Yeah.
Being able to ensure good internet, being able to ensure a confidential space for our clients' privacy, those sorts of things, the physical environment.
And I guess if you're going to evacuate to a center, all those things are going to be compromised as far as, or at least you have to pay special attention on a personal level to ensure that space, or to make sure you get where you're going and you have your computer with you and all of that too. So, I mean, is there any prep? Like if a storm happens, would you advise your clients on how to help to get them prepared as well?
Well, absolutely. That's something that a counselor could work on with any of their clients. And of course, that's going to vary on a client by client basis. As with so many things during COVID, a large part of it is the disruption to the normal anticipated routine. People in New Orleans usually have some sort of rough plan in place for how they typically handle hurricanes and storms of varying intensity. But now all of that is complicated. Their options have changed, their resources have changed. And so a counselor can help them put all of that into place and into perspective and develop a new plan for these new circumstances.
And I guess as Roy and I were talking, you might need two plans, one to stay home, one to go. A couple of go bags, or one stay bag and a go bag, or plans that you wouldn't necessarily need to make. I mean, we're all used to getting our supplies together, but there are going to be a lot more supplies for this one.
Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned having those to-go bags ready. In these circumstances, it might be more difficult to get your hands on some supplies that you're used to being a little more readily available. And so you might have to plan a little further in advance than you're used to, or you may have to prepare a little more extensively than you're used to. Both for leaving and for staying.
And there's going to be a fear factor in going to a shelter. I mean, you're going to be around a lot of people you don't know, and you don't know how they've been handling things, or what precautions they're taking. Social distancing, all of that is going to be a factor with that. I'm sure that's got to be stress-inducing.
Absolutely.
And with that in mind, there's so many different things that families are contending with right now. Here we are amidst a pandemic, 6 months into it. Hurricane season is upon us. The peak of hurricane season is upon us, and it's also in conjunction with the start of the academic year for everyone. So there's so many different things that people are contending with at one time, that the threat of a tropical storm or a hurricane might surprise someone in any given day. Sometimes they just pop up, in the Gulf, right off our coast, and they say it'll be here within 24 or 48 hours. And so having to get things in order right then and there. That's why it's important to have these conversations right now, to have these preparedness plans in place now with your family, to have these preparedness plans in place, and perhaps discuss it in session with a counselor that can help you get some perspective and think about possibilities that perhaps haven't crossed your mind, and to coordinate with other third parties, schools, municipalities, family members, all of these different things that have to come together for you to make a more informed decision, as well as keeping an eye on what's going on in other parts of the country. States that we typically evacuate to, such as Texas or Mississippi or Alabama or Georgia, that we see what's going on there, because that may not be an option for certain families for a myriad of reasons. Mm-hmm. If you have someone who has a compromised immune system or is a member of a vulnerable population, you may not want to evacuate to a place you typically evacuate to, because there's a hot spot right there. We are coming from a hot spot ourselves, and so we, being mindful that we don't go to an area that we're putting people at risk. We want to be able to keep ourselves safe, keep others safe, and just having these conversations with one another right now is of the utmost importance, so that we can all be safe during this time that we're all experiencing both a pandemic and peak hurricane season.
My guess is there will also be a little bit of consternation when you're deciding, do I bring my whole family to another family up north, or wherever you go, to the west or the east, and will they want us there? That kind of, it's kind of a...
Yeah, if you tend to evacuate to family members further up north or west or east, they may say, you know what, not this time. We regret that you can't come, but you need to find other ways. And so finding what those possible alternatives might be. You may want to see what the state of Louisiana has in place with regard to shelters further up north within our state, because that might be something that you might have as a recourse. We don't know that. I don't know that with any degree of certainty. They may not have shelters because of COVID.
Right.
And so just
Or
seeing,
staffing.
Or staffing. You know, as you had mentioned earlier, some of the volunteers that are in place perhaps that would typically volunteer in 2020, they may decide not to because of not wanting to be exposed to large amounts of people. So these are all things that we have to really think about now before we're faced with a situation at the last minute.
And Dr. White, I'm sure that there's also some economic stress involved in this as well. I mean, a lot of people are laid off and they don't have the money to go get a hotel or to really stock up a lot of supplies or make the big trip. So that's got to be weighing on them too, right?
Yes, and earlier we were talking about the considerations that the counseling interns have to work with when making sure that they can provide services wherever they go. For those of us who are still employed, maybe either solidly or tentatively, and doing a lot of our work remotely, if you suddenly have to leave an environment in which you have everything set up to where you can continue to do your job, that's going to change, and you might have some difficulty adjusting that wherever you go also.
Wow, I didn't even think about that one, you know, because yeah, you can grab your computer, but then you also need, oh wait, this is here. Do I pack up everything? All those.
Right. You know, and if you evacuate to a hotel room with your family, can you provide your work? You know, you can't exactly provide a counseling service or counseling session as a counselor in training or as a licensed professional counselor with your wife and kids in the room,
and you're having barking.
And the dog barking, and you have a private conversation with a client. You know, all of these things are things that have to be thought of, and as well as family members, rather, or clients, if they're in a respective shelter or hotel room with people around within earshot. You know, all of these are conversations that have to take place prior to ensure that, one, confidentiality is being met and we're still meeting the service and keeping people safe. So there's ways of working around it, there's ways of doing it, but discussing it with your counselor or your therapist, you can come up with a solution as to how that would look.
Right. Dr. White, thank you. You've given us a lot of things to think about and to really plan for, and as we all go into this hurricane or are in this hurricane season. So thank you for joining us, and we'll be back in a moment with more tips on weathering the storm, even during COVID. Making plans to keep yourself and your family safe as a major storm approaches is nerve-wracking enough when nothing else is going on. Add a pandemic to that, and it can add a whole new level of planning and stress and, you know, all those things that go along with that. We want to bring in Dr. Michaela Hartline, the assistant professor of counseling at the University of Holy Cross, to talk about this very real possibility. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So as we, we're in a very active season and all these things will be swirling around if and when we get a storm. Certain things to keep in mind when the stress level goes up. What do you think?
Well, I think it's important that in the event that we were to have a serious storm is to get to a safe place and to evacuate. As a teenager when Katrina happened, I did stay for Katrina, and I swore to myself that that would never happen again. So even with the current situation, it still is it's very important to leave to get to a safe place from the storm. But with that being said, reach out to your counselors. It is very stressful right now with COVID and having to evacuate at the same time. And due to the current situation, the board has allowed counselors to see clients if you were to have to evacuate and go over state lines. As long as you're a resident of Louisiana, we can still conduct teletherapy. So you can still be in communication with your counselor to work through some of those stressors that you may be experiencing while evacuating.
Oh, good point, because that's something that people might not know, because this is special circumstances.
Right.
For the telecounseling right from the beginning, we talked about that.
Yes, and it's important to realize, just like any other profession, physicians, attorneys, counselors, you get a license to practice in a given state. So we as professionals are licensed to practice in this state and not necessarily in other states, unless you perhaps work to get licensed in another state as well. But most practitioners are licensed in this state. Right now, those rules have been rescinded. Those guidelines have been rescinded for the duration of 120 days during this pandemic. So in the event of an evacuation, if people were to evacuate across state lines, there are currently no guidelines that are being enforced in order to be able to provide that service. So you could provide that service. That being said, under normal circumstances, if someone were to cross state lines, the counselor would have to check with the state board of a given state to ensure that you're not violating any statutes or codes, that you're not practicing outside of the state of Louisiana and practicing without a license in another state. So there's so many different things that one has to think about, but right now, counselors and clients have to think about those things, but fortunately, we have a respite from that in the event that clients have to evacuate and go out of state, and they want that continuity of care with their counselor.
It is comforting to know there are controls, but even more comforting now to know that they're relaxed a little bit so you can continue to get the help you need.
Right.
Okay, so Dr. Hartline, let's talk a little bit about the building stress that this can cause, and with the pandemic certainly, and also with the normal stress that comes from a hurricane and evacuation decisions. And what if you're going to a shelter and you're suddenly around a whole bunch of new, different strangers? And that's got to be, the stress level. You got kids and everything.
Absolutely. We want to protect ourselves with COVID, but we also have to make sure that we get to a safe ground in the event that we have to evacuate due to a hurricane. So the stress level is going to be heightened, that anxiety is going to be heightened. I think it's important to remember to, wear your mask and practice social distancing the best that you can. And that self-care that I know we've talked about in prior sessions is very important, but very difficult in that event, because you have to meet that immediate need of safety in that moment. And that immediate need of safety is to make sure that you get to a place where you're away from the weather that comes with hurricanes and the risk of flooding, being in New Orleans. We know that happens often. So to just kind of do the best you can in the current situation, it's very, very stressful and very anxiety provoking. So I think having a plan, prior to, in the event that this were to happen, these are my options, and these are a plan that may help kind of lower some of that stress level, things like that.
Can counselors help talk through this plan as you're trying to figure out what would I do if, there's something coming to the Gulf or whatever?
Yeah, exploring with the client what their options may be and if they've thought about it. That's something that definitely they can figure out through the counseling process prior to.
And I'm guessing counselors have to stay on top of all of the advice from city officials and state officials and even news, just to see what might be open, what isn't open, what's available. I mean, you guys have to be not only good at counseling, but also at informing on what's available.
Yeah, and we don't know what options our client have, what's available to them. For some individuals, they may have the financial means to evacuate to another state, but some clients, that may be difficult for them. So it's important to know what is available for your client in that moment.
I'm sure financial stress is a problem.
And counselors can do what is referred to as a needs assessment. You take the information that's available, for example, become informed in terms of the resources out there, what's out there externally for a given client, and then do a needs assessment. Okay, where are they currently, financially, emotionally, physically, and how can we match external resources to meet the need of an individual client? And so in preparing for a potential threat and an evacuation, getting all that stuff beforehand so that you can make a more informed decision as to how to proceed so that client can make a decision and remain safe, either in the city or evacuating outside of the city.
So more prep on your part as a counselor.
Beforehand, absolutely, more prep on our part.
And more prep on their part, so you can all come together and really make a
Yes.
session really helpful.
Right. Right now, I, as a counselor, I'm becoming informed as to what is possible and what is available and what the community is offering in the weeks ahead as we prepare for hurricane season. What is Orleans Parish saying? What is Jefferson Parish saying? What is the state of Louisiana saying? What are other states nearby saying? So that I can then inform clients, assess their specific needs, and determine, okay, this is what the resources are, this is what the circumstances are in our region, and this is what we have to work with in line with what your needs are. Now let's proceed. What are your options?
Wow, you guys have double duty there, Dr. Hartline, so you've got to really be informative and a counselor, I guess. So thank you for doing all that and for offering the service. We really appreciate it. Dr. Hartline, thanks for talking with us too.
Thank you.
Okay, Roy, as we move into the tips for this and we face hurricanes, I know there's seems to always be something forming somewhere.
Right.
You know, where it's going to go, we don't know, but.
And so I would say stay informed. Right now that we're in peak hurricane season, keep your eye out on the Gulf, keep your eye out on the Atlantic to see what's potentially around the corner, what's coming in the next day or two or in the next week or two. Just keep informed so that you can start to plan and stay ahead of any potential threat. And if there is a threat coming our way, that you evacuate. You know, don't second guess yourself too much. You know, it's better to get in your car and evacuate, and even stay in your car in further north in Louisiana and then drive back. Just be safe and keep your family safe. With that, carry personal hygiene items with you at all times. All of the things that we have discussed earlier of hand sanitizer, wipes, paper towels, toilet paper, extra masks, alcohol, as much as you can. Maintain your own personal hygiene by washing your hands frequently. Practice social distancing wherever it is that you may go, whether it be in northern Louisiana or in other states. Always cover your mouth and nose when around other people, so cover your nose with a mask when you're around other people, and plan and prepare for the peak of hurricane season with all of these things amidst this COVID-19 crisis.
It's really difficult to deal with. You know, evacuation always kind of brings everybody's stress level up, and to add it with this, with all the now, how am I going to handle it? What is it going to look like there?
Right.
All those unknowns.
Yeah, and to keep yourself and your family safe, you know, it's very stressful, you know, to have, you know, to load up the car and to get out, you know, with all the things, and then, you know, kids wearing masks, getting in and out of gas stations. It's a lot to think about.
Finding bathrooms along the way.
Right.
You know.
And so, you know, and then if you're stuck in contraflow traffic, that could be hours. You know, all of those different things. We need to plan ahead so that we are not overwhelmed or more overwhelmed than we otherwise would be.
Okay, thanks. A lot to think about here. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Roy Salgado, and everybody else at the University of Holy Cross who has joined us today. And thank you for watching. We want to help as we are all coping during the COVID crisis.